Hello everyone and welcome to Big Rock Moto. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I recently had the great opportunity to ride the brand new MV Agusta Enduro Veloce for 2 days on and off road here in Southern California. In this video, we'll talk briefly about who is MV Agusta as a company. We'll talk you through the specs and features of the new Enduro Veloce. We'll take you on a ride both on and off road. We'll cover the pros and cons. We'll talk about who this bike is for, and we'll end with some final thoughts. All right, so since many of you or some of you may not be that familiar with MV Agusta as a motorcycle company, let's talk just briefly about their history. MV Agusta is a small Italian motorcycle manufacturer that had their roots in airplane manufacturing, which peaked during the First and Second World Wars. After World War II, planes were not in demand nearly as much, and they used their engine manufacturing expertise to make their first motorcycle around 1945. Between 1950 and 1980, MV Agusta dominated much of the motorcycle racing around the globe, and their star racer Giacomo Agostini won over 300 different races. Now, despite their success in racing, MV Agusta has always struggled financially to make money, and over the decades has been passed around to all sorts of various different financial owners. Finally, just this year in March of 2024, Pierer Mobility Group, which is the parent company of KTM, Husqvarna, and GasGas, acquired a 50.1% stake in MV Agusta. Now, to give you a sense of the small scale of MV Agusta as a motorcycle company, they have averaged a production number of around 2,500 to 10,000 motorcycles if you look at the past 10 or 20 years, depending on which year you look at. Now, for reference, Ducati, which is also considered to be a small motorcycle company, also in Italy, they produced somewhere around 50 to 60,000 motorcycles in recent years per any given year. Now, if you really want to compare this, Honda sells somewhere around 20 million motorcycles every single year worldwide. Of course, that includes their scooters, but that just gives you a sense of how small MV Agusta really is. All right, now there are two different models of the Enduro Veloce, and it started with a concept bike called the Lucky Explorer, and there was like a 9.5 and a 5.5 that evolved into the LXP Oriole, and then that evolved into the Enduro Veloce. So what's going on here? So there are actually two different versions of this motorcycle that you're able to purchase. There's a limited production version called the LXP Oriole, and that has a different paint scheme, upgraded suspension, upgraded wheel sets, an upgraded exhaust, and a few other features. And that bike comes in right around $29,000, which is quite steep. Then you go to the bike which is featured here in this review today, which is the standard Enduro Veloce, which comes in at $22,000. All right, so let's look at some of the specs of the Enduro Veloce. So the MSRP, as I just mentioned before, is $22,000. The wet weight of the bike, so fueled up, ready to ride, they don't publish this for me or for us, but I'm doing a little bit of math on my own. It should be around 530 pounds or 240 kilograms. They publish a dry weight, and then I have to kind of estimate what the wet weight is going to be. The engine is a 931cc 3-cylinder engine with a very unique counter-rotating crankshaft that MV Agusta claims cancels out the gyroscopic effect of the front wheel, improving the bike's handling. This is an all-new engine. It makes 125 horsepower and 75 foot-pounds or 102 newton-meters of torque. The bike has fully adjustable suspension by Sachs, and the travel is 8.3 inches or 210 millimeters both front and back. For our wheel set, we're looking at a 21-inch front wheel, an 18-inch rear wheel by Excel, and they are tubeless spoked wheels, which is really nice. The bike has a 27-degree suspension rake angle, which is a very nice stable number, which helps it off-road. The brakes on this bike are phenomenal. They are Brembo Stylema front calipers. They have cornering ABS and off-road ABS, and they're phenomenal brakes. Seat height is adjustable. The standard position is 33.5 inches or 850 millimeters, but you can raise that by about 3/4 inch or by about 20 millimeters if you desire to do that. Fuel tank, you have a 5.3 gallon or 20 liter fuel tank which depending on your throttle hand, you know, it's going to determine your range. Now, the bike has a full suite of electronics and a really nice TFT display. You have all sorts of different ride modes that are configurable and customizable. You have 8-level traction control, which is also configurable for whether you have knobby tires or road tires, which is really nice. You have cruise control, you have a quick shifter, you have launch control. Yes, you get launch control on a motorcycle. It's phenomenal, it works. I don't know of any other adventure bike that has that. You get connectivity for phone and media, all sorts of things, so it's got a lot of good technology in it. Over 2 days of riding this bike, we put on quite a bit of mileage, quite a bit of saddle time, and we ended up riding about 400 to 450 miles or somewhere around 700 kilometers. And during this time, we rode everything from twisty roads to off-road to high-speed interstate, where you can see here I'm cruising at about 85 miles an hour. So let's first talk about the highway experience with the Enduro Veloce. If you're going to cruise a lot on the highways at higher speeds, depending on what country you live in. So this bike, I was really impressed with a number of things. The wind protection is pretty good. I would have wished for an adjustable windshield and a little bit less buffeting, but the wind protection, I would say, is above average in the middleweight class. In terms of engine vibration, you really cannot feel any buzziness at normal highway speeds around 60 to 80 miles per hour. You only really feel some buzziness coming from that 3-cylinder engine at very high RPMs or very high speeds. The bike has a comfortable cruise at around 80 to 85 miles an hour, and we spent a lot of time on the freeways at those speeds. It's also really nice, of course, having cruise control, which you do expect at this price point. In terms of some of the rideability and the fueling, you have so much customization in the computer to configure your ride modes and your throttle response and your engine torque and your engine braking and all these things, and you're going to be able to definitely figure out some modes that work really well for you to keep things smooth. The suspension on the Enduro Veloce is excellent. It's one of the better suspensions that I've tested on any of these modern adventure bikes. It's very good, and what you would expect at really such a high price point. It also has a lot of different settings and things you can play with to dial in the ride, depending on whether you're riding on highway, sport riding, or off-road. Speaking of sport riding, we got to sample, well, I shouldn't say sample because I'm lucky I ride these roads all the time. We rode some of the best twisty pavement in Southern California. We did Palomar Mountain, both sides. We did Mesa Grande. We did the glass elevator down to Borrego Springs, Highway S22. We did roads around Idlewild. We really put in our seat time, and here in this clip I spent a lot of the time chasing Pikes Peak record holder Chris Fillmore, who works with Pierer Mobility as one of their media managers, and he is an excellent rider, just unbelievably good, and it's always a great challenge to try to keep up with him on these back roads. So how does the Enduro Veloce go on twisty roads? So we did have more of a street-oriented tire when we did the first day of the ride. So, you know, the engine is a major standout. 80% of torque available at 3,000 RPM. You have so much drive coming out of the corners, even if you don't want to downshift and use really high RPM, with all that torque available down low. Of course, one of the overriding characteristics of this bike is the incredible sound. The sound of the motor when you're accelerating, the sound of the blips from the quick shifter, it is, you just have to experience it to understand. It doesn't even come through fully on the video. It is addicting and intoxicating and emotional, and I think the best sounding motorcycle I've ever ridden or tested. And I'm not making that up. I'm not exaggerating. The handling for these twisty roads is very neutral, very good, very agile for what it is. For a 21-inch front wheel adventure bike with a tall suspension, I don't think it gets any better than this. I will say the Ducati DesertX would give this bike a good run for the money in the twisties. That bike has an amazing chassis as well, but I think this is up there with the DesertX in terms of handling. The brakes, we've talked about that, they're incredible. They give you a ton of confidence. You do obviously have front suspension dive because you have a 210 millimeter suspension. There's just no way around that. The only real limitation when riding this bike sort of on twisty roads is one, your skill and ability and confidence, and two, really your tires, what kind of tires you're using.
All right, we're in my local area as it happens, and we're gonna ride some trails on the Enduro Veloce. So I've got my traction control turned off and rear ABS turned off, and let's go. Because it's, you know, still a heavy adventure bike, it does definitely help to stand up when you're riding this bike. Suspension is just excellent on this motorcycle, truly excellent. That was not graceful, but I did get through that. Let's see. There's already something happening up here. Let's see what is... That is a large cloud of dust right there.
For the off-road portions of this test, I do want to mention that they did switch all the bikes out to a knobby Bridgestone AX41, which are a pretty great off-road tire. We did encounter some pretty challenging conditions, as you can see here from these clips.
Okay. You. Yee-hoo! Woo! That was a case of less is more. Go slower to go faster. I mean, even though they did a pretty good job designing this bike, it still is quite a handful off-road. It's a lot of bike to try to control at slower speeds. Whoa. All right, let me show you the Ian way of doing things, which is slow and boring, but typically does not result in crashing. So, I don't know why my glove is getting stuck. Must be sweating. What a lot of the guys do is they want to stand up and go fast, but you can't do that when the trail is like this. Slow and steady wins the race. This bike it is really jumpy on the throttle. It's very jumpy on the throttle, and what a lot of the guys are not doing, they're not using the right modes because they want to be in the aggressive mode. But on a trail like this, you want that fine control and that finesse with the throttle. So you have to change the throttle response and the power modes. You can still have your traction control off, but this is people not knowing how to use the electronics properly. And that's a real problem in our industry, is that guys always want to turn everything off and then turn everything to most aggressive. But that really hurts you in terrain like this, where you want that finer control. And again, it's just sometimes the advice that other people give you is not right. And I've learned from testing adventure bikes to trust my own instincts, especially with a 3-cylinder like this. It's very jumpy, very sporty on the throttle. So it really helps to tone that down by using the appropriate settings in the computer. Because like, this is not desert racing, right? This is like trail riding. But the bike becomes a lot more rideable when you tune in your settings with your power and your throttle and stuff like that. Plus, I'm finding that leaving it in second gear and letting the engine lug a bit more is helping smooth things out, because it just wants to light up the wheels so quickly under power. So running a higher gear can really help with that.
I'm not sure how many people are really going to purchase this bike for $22,000 and then take it on trails like this, but if you are, there are a few things you should know about it. The Enduro Veloce off-road is a bit of a mixed bag. So we have a good chassis and really, really nice high-quality suspension. The weight, it is on the heavier side. We did have to pick up some bikes and they didn't feel too bad. So I would say it feels kind of like the other middleweight bikes, even though on paper it is a little bit heavier. The downsides of the Enduro Veloce off-road really come down to kind of the response of the engine. The engine is so powerful and wants to rev up so fast that if you don't get your settings really right in the computer in terms of your throttle response and things like that, dialing that down, and then you also need to keep the engine below about 5,000 RPM. If you go above that, the rear tire just lights up and the bike becomes really jumpy and pretty, it's just a challenge to really control it in any sort of refined way. And we saw a lot of issues with people experiencing that. Now, the traction control. So one thing I didn't like, the traction control, although it does have like the 8 levels and it was developed in coordination with KTM and those guys, it was still too intrusive. Even the off-road, there was only one useful off-road traction control setting, like number 1 or 2, and then anything above that just was far too intrusive. Most people ran with it off. I did end up running in 1 and 2 to give me some control of that rear wheel spin, and that does help, but it is not nearly as good as the system on something like a KTM 890 Adventure. Overall, off-road, this bike is definitely not, I would say, not the best in the category. And it does, I think, have some struggles in terms of the controllability, but that can be alleviated if you know, again, how to tune in your bike and how to ride it a bit more gently. But I would not choose this bike in the middleweight adventure segment. If I was doing a lot of off-road riding, I think something like a DesertX or even a Tiger 900, if you want a 3-cylinder, is a bit more controllable and a bit easier to ride in off-road conditions.
I think there's kind of the big question of like, who is this bike for? And I think the answer to that is, if you're bored with everything else and you want something really special, unique, handcrafted. This sounds like a supercar. It goes like hell, stops like hell, works well on and off-road, has really nice componentry, looks amazing. But you really have to be in that position to want something and be willing to pay a big premium for something very unique, limited production, and something you're not going to see at every adventure rally event you go to. I mean, when do you ever see, you know, an MV Agusta? I don't know, maybe you'll start to see more of them, but that is so addicting and it does not get old. What a machine. What a special machine. After 2 days of this, I am still not bored it is still special every time you open the throttle on this machine. So I think a bike at this price point, there's some features missing that I'd like to see. Heated grip should be standard. An adjustable windshield should come standard. Also, maybe electronic suspension, just because again, other bikes at this price point are going to have electronic suspension. A couple things that have gone a little bit wrong with my bike over the 2 days. My clutch interlock switch is malfunctioning, so I can't start the bike in gear even with the clutch pulled in. So every time I want to start the bike, I have to put the bike in neutral, which is very strange. And then my steering head bearing came loose, so it's making a huge racket as it bangs around there in the steering stem. The other thing I don't like quite so much is just the drive line has a lot of like play in it, or lash, like the chain drive and the clutch take up and sort of that throttle response. It also depends on what mode you run it in, but it can be a little bit jerky and a little bit kind of hard to ride sometimes. It just doesn't have the refinement of some other brands, so I'm not quite sure what's causing that.
All right, so what do we think? Can the new $22,000 Enduro Veloce save this company? Can it save MV Agusta from whatever sort of financial consequences that it may face going forward? This is a really, really tough one. And of course, the truth is, I don't know for sure. I think there's a few things that we can think about. Adventure motorcycles is such a big phenomenon right now, and I think it is incredibly smart of Pierer Mobility and MV Agusta to get into this adventure segment with the Enduro Veloce. I think that's really, really smart. We're seeing a lot of other companies be very successful in this segment. Now, in terms of the price tag, it is a very premium product. So you're looking at Ducati, BMW kind of pricing strategy. Now, BMW has been extremely successful selling a high number of expensive adventure bikes around the world. So who's to say that this couldn't work? Now, there are going to be challenges getting their name out there, getting the recognition. People are going to worry about dealer support, parts availability, reliability, all the sorts of things that come with buying sort of this bespoke, small production Italian motorcycle. I guess I would just put it to all of you out there. What do you think? Do you think that the Enduro Veloce can sort of help MV Agusta as a motorcycle company continue going forward into the future? Because I do think in a way that's probably what's at stake here. It's kind of the elephant in the room that the other folks aren't really talking about. But with these financial difficulties that they have, will Pierer Mobility just say, you know what, if you can't make money in the next 5 years or something, we're just going to end it? Is that something that could happen? And is the Enduro Veloce a bike that could maybe help them avoid that? I hope so. I want to think so, because it's a fantastic motorcycle and really a very special motorcycle brand. All right, well, I think that's about it. If you want to support what I do here, there's ways to do that in the description below. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. Ride safe, and I'll see you out there.